Good evening. This is Brass Tacks. I'm Zaka Jacob. There was high drama both in the air and on the ground as U.S. Speaker of the House of Representatives Nancy Pelosi touched down at the Shangshan International Airport in Taipei, Taiwan. Now, the first time a U.S. House Speaker has touched down in Taipei, but it's the first time in 25 years that this has happened, and there was huge drama all around. Beijing called it a direct provocation. China has been scrambling. It has sent its fighter jets into Taiwanese airspace. It has closed airspace for civilian aircraft moving towards the Taipei Straits. And most importantly, it's going to be taking out live fire drills for the next 4 days all around the island of Taiwan. The simple question that's coming to the top of mind for every layman and laywoman who's watching this broadcast around the world tonight is this: are the United States and China going to go to war over Taiwan? All right, just as Nancy Pelosi has touched down in Taiwan, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has put out a very strongly worded statement saying that it strongly protests and condemns her visit. Remember, this is the first time in 25 years that a U.S. House Speaker is visiting Taiwan. The statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry goes on to say that Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan seriously violates and undermines the One China principle as well as provisions of 3 communiques between China and the United States. China, it says, will definitely take all necessary measures to resolutely safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity in response to the U.S. Speaker's visit, all the consequences of which must be borne by the United States and by Taiwan separatist forces. This is what the Chinese Foreign Ministry has put out as a tweet and as a statement just moments ago. They've also confirmed that China will be undertaking live fire drills from the 4th of August to the 7th of August at a time when Nancy Pelosi would have just landed in Taiwan. In fact, Pelosi is going to be in Taipei for less than 24 hours in what is a 4-nation Asia tour. This visit was under the wraps. In fact, even as her plane was circling around the South and East China Seas, there was still no confirmation officially from either her office or from the U.S. government that the Speaker does indeed intend to land in Taiwan. She landed just after 8 o'clock India time and has driven straight to the hotel. Tomorrow, she will be meeting the Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen as well as other parliamentarians. She will also visit a museum which celebrates democracy and human rights. But let me open this up. And the question that many are asking, we're already in the middle of a long-drawn war now between Russia and Ukraine. It is now in its 6th month. Are we now looking at the prospect of a second war, perhaps even a much bigger one, between the United States and China over Taiwan? Andrew K.P. Leung is joining us. He's an international and independent China strategist based out of Hong Kong. Jeepard Sarthi is a former diplomat. Amici Stein is a correspondent with Cannes Diplomatic Desk at the Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation. Lisa Curtis, Director of Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for New American Security. Lisa Curtis, I'll start with you first. Like I said, not the first time a U.S. House Speaker is visiting Taiwan, but this time around there was so much drama around this, and it continues even now. Even just before coming into the studio, the Chinese Foreign Ministry putting out a very, very terse statement, taking exception to Nancy Pelosi's visit. What could likely be the outcome of this visit, in as much as do you see China stepping up on military action? Yes, rhetoric has gone through the roof, but will there be commensurate military action against Taiwan?
Well, thank you. Certainly the tensions are going up. China is, signaling its displeasure with Nancy Pelosi's visit, which, I have to remind people that this signals no change in U.S. policy. The U.S. continues to support the One China policy, be guided by the Taiwan's Relations Act. So there's really no change in policy. There were differences about whether this visit should even go forward. As you know, the president uh, signaled that he did not think it should go forward, that the military objected to it. But because of our separation of powers, it was the decision of Nancy Pelosi's office. And frankly, once the Chinese actually threatened her, I think she had no choice but to continue on with the visit. She couldn't be seen as being cowed by Chinese threats. But there are some in the United States who see this as an important visit because of China's increasing aggression toward Taiwan in both rhetoric and what it's doing in terms of the unprecedented number of violations of Taiwan's identification zone, the high rhetoric we saw at the Shangri-La dialogue with the Chinese defense minister, threatening Taiwan. So I think that, it's seen as important to show support for the Taiwan people, but certainly tensions are as high as they have been in a very, very long time. We can expect that China will conduct, provocative military maneuvers around Taiwan. But I do think it's a time where the U.S. should also be trying to cool down the tensions. And whether that happens behind the scenes, however that can happen, I think it is a time that both sides need to be careful that there's not a miscalculation, that we don't allow this to devolve into any kind of conflict, which neither side wants.
Amichai Stein,
I don't think that we're
yeah,
going to see
it's also a
war
critical
between
time, Amichai
the
Stein,
U.S. and China.
for the Chinese
Right.
and
At the same
particularly
time,
for the Chinese leadership because we do know that the party Congress, the Communist Party Congress, comes up later this year, and that's where Xi Jinping could get elevated to the level of chairman of the Communist Party and perhaps even president for life. Who knows? These are live pictures that we're getting of Nancy Pelosi's convoy now pulling in to the five-star hotel in Taipei, where she will be staying for the next less than 24 hours. But Amichai Stein, the question that's being asked is, how may China be expected to respond? Because you obviously can't have a loss of face situation. That's a big deal in China. You can't have a loss of face, particularly for Xi Jinping, as he looks to this 20th Party Congress. You have the U.S. Speaker of the House of Representatives not only defying the threat and the rhetoric that has been issued from Beijing, but this is literally like, as somebody in the newsroom said, sticking your finger in the eye.
You're completely right, because I read today Newt Gingrich, who was House Speaker in 1997 and visited Taiwan, said that the Chinese told him not to go. He said, I'm going. And that was it. Now, like you said, it's a whole different situation because we have the Chinese Communist Party Congress coming up. And Xi Jinping cannot look as a weak person. And that's why we're seeing China already in the last hour announcing a huge military exercise around the coastlines of Taiwan. So the Chinese at this point, from what we're seeing at least, are going to show some kind of military force around Taiwan. But I don't think, at least for now, they will go further than that. So they're going to show they're the boss in the area. They've decided to do these exercises. There might be several more steps. We saw the U.S. administration saying yesterday that we might see China firing into the Taiwanese straits, something that was in the last time only in 1995. So at this point, what the U.S. at least was predicting that we will see some kind of military steps, but China won't go further than that, meaning we won't see, for example, an operation against Taiwanese areas or territory. So at this point, we're seeing also the military trying to show some strength around Taiwan. And we also were seeing a psychological war against the U.S. For example, there was a tweet of an official Chinese newspaper that said that Nancy Pelosi had to do a longer route towards Taiwan, because they fear that they might be intercepted by the Chinese. Of course, we don't know if it's true or not true, but it's some kind of psychological war saying, yes, she's visiting there, but we at least decided what the route will look like because they were afraid from us.
Andrew K.P. Liang, yes, Amichai Stein is right. There's been a lot of psychological warfare, a lot of psyops that's been going on over the last 12 hours or so. We're seeing those pictures of tanks and armored personnel carriers on the beaches of Xiamen in Fujian City, and these are, of course, the closest to Taiwan and to the Taipei Straits. How much mind games is going on here? And the question that everybody really wants to know is, beyond all this propaganda videos and these mind games that China is playing, will it actually cross that threshold? Will it actually cross that Rubicon of taking military action against Taiwan, which, as I understand, there's never been a full-fledged military operation that Beijing has ever undertaken against Taiwan since 1949?
Well,
I think is the real question.
Andrew Liang, please. That question is to Andrew Liang. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think that the Taiwan question, of course, is an extremely important for President Xi and for Beijing in general, and indeed for the whole of the Chinese people, because the unification has always been on the minds of all the Chinese people, not only in the mainland, but throughout the Chinese diaspora. And in fact, it is part of Xi Jinping's China dream. Now, of course, the United States has been saying that it's honoring the One China principle. But of course, there is the Taiwan Relations Act authorizing the United States to supply arms to Taiwan, to help Taiwan defend itself. But on the other hand, the American promise of holding fast to the One China principle is seen to be a hollow promise, in the sense that the United States seems to be giving a lot of elbow room for Taiwan, as if Taiwan was a separate country, by fielding more and more senior officials to visit Taiwan, and perhaps cajoling American allies to do the same, and also opening up a lot of diplomatic space in international organizations for Taiwan to play, as if Taiwan was a separate country. So this is really continuing rubbing salt into China's wounds, as it were, and ignoring the kind of threats, as seen by Beijing, and indeed by most of the Chinese people. But answering the most critical question on people's mind now, at this very tense juncture, will it all end up in war? My reading is that it's unlikely, because now on both sides, the November timing is very important. On the part of Beijing is the National People's Congress coming up, which is going to confirm a third term for President Xi, and also is going to unveil a new leadership in the Standing Committee Politburo, including the replacement of the current Premier Li Jiaqiang. So there's a lot of very important changes are going to be confirmed in November. As for the United States, the same holds true, because there's the midterm elections coming up, and then the Democratic Party, both President Biden and Nancy Pelosi, are likely to see their hold weakened by Republican challengers. So both sides cannot afford to have an all-out war. Now, there's a third point, which is confirmed by the U.S. military, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in his recent testimony in Congress. General Mark Milley, a couple of months ago, confirmed that China has not achieved 100% confidence of prevailing over Taiwan. Now, Taiwan, of course, is separated from the mainland by a body of water, something like 100 miles. But apart from that, most of the Taiwan terrain is very hilly. It's only about 8% of Taiwan's terrain is amenable to a kind of amphibious operations, apart from the exposure to a lot of risks for
Okay.
any amphibious forces. So a lot of things that hang on the balance, and then Beijing is unlikely to take this drastic step.
To actually launch a
And
full-fledged military
exactly,
operation. All right. Just give me a
and
moment,
also,
Andrew. I'm getting another piece of breaking news before I go to Ambassador Parthasarathy. This is the first statement from the White House, from the Biden administration. It says, and I quote, that Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is not a violation of China's sovereignty. So this is the first reaction from the White House. The White House has just put out a statement saying that the U.S. Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, her visit to Taiwan is not a violation of China's sovereignty. This is a big statement. Remember, Biden a few weeks ago had said that the military has told him that it is not a good idea at this time. They were talking about Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, but now the first reaction from the White House after the Speaker's flight touchdown in Taipei at the Shangshan International Airport has been that Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is not a violation of China's sovereignty. Let me go across to Ambassador Parthasarathy. What do you make of that? Is there an attempt to try and sort of ratchet down the rhetoric, especially from Washington's side, so that China doesn't end up doing something that it cannot wind back down from?
Well, I think both sides have landed themselves in a situation that neither wanted to be. But the Speaker of the House is the Speaker of the House, and I guess this is about her final term, and she would like to go out with some glory. And therefore, she has done what she thinks is correct and what many people think is correct, because she is, after all, not going there for a defense treaty or anything. Taiwan has a democratic parliament, though nobody formally recognizes it, and she's the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and she's going there. But now, having said that, they have to find a way out without either side losing face. And I think we are seeing the beginnings of that they are not violating sovereignty.
Military terms, the Chinese could well react with some small intrusion into territorial waters of the Taiwan, or they can fly a aircraft somewhere near Taiwan. But they will have to save face. This is the beginning of the exercise to enable both sides to get into a situation really neither one likes to be in.
All right, we're getting more breaking news, and again, this is a response from Beijing, because they need to be seen as doing something in response, not just heard as doing something in response. This is the PLA Eastern Theater Command. They've just put out a statement saying that they will be holding joint military operations around the Taiwan Straits, with joint maritime as well as air drills in the Taiwan Straits, as well as conventional missile testing that'll happen at sea starting Tuesday night. So clearly, China not just upping the rhetoric, but also upping the military ops parameter, if you will. There were pictures all across Chinese social media through the day today of tanks and armored personnel carriers, fighter jets, all of them being sort of pressed into service, if you will. But now this latest, the PLA Eastern Theater Command will be holding joint military operations around the Taiwan Straits. It's going to be maritime, air drills, and of course, conventional missile testing as well. Let me go back to Lisa Curtis. Lisa Curtis, the problem is, many of these drills, as they were, these military drills, whether it's maritime or air drills, the elbow room is very, very thin at a time such as this, where there is heightened tensions, heightened rhetoric. It could easily spill over into an action-reaction kind of a situation. How do both sides guard against that?
Yeah, well, it's an excellent question. I don't think it's surprising that China is taking these steps, and I have to think that the U.S. military planned for such a Chinese reaction. This is why they probably wanted to dissuade Nancy Pelosi from going to Taiwan. But it is extremely dangerous, and I think that the U.S. military will have to have sort of game this out, plan this out, and figure out, how to not let the tensions escalate, how to avoid miscalculation. This would be a good time for, General Milley to maybe tap he has had contact with his counterpart in China to, have a conversation, try to put something in place so that there is no miscalculation. I think the previous speaker who talked about the need to save face is absolutely correct. And so I think if the U.S. can view these provocative military activities by China as seeking to save face, then perhaps the U.S. can go out of its way to try to damp down the tensions, not allow any type of miscalculation to happen, and to ensure that we can get through this very tense period without allowing the situation to devolve into any type of conflict. That should be the top of mind of all U.S. military planners and leadership right now. And I'm quite certain that is what's happening. They were prepared for a Chinese reaction, and so we have to hope that right now there are several steps being taken to avoid any type of conflict from breaking out.
All right. More information coming through. Again, we're getting some details now of Nancy Pelosi's itinerary, what she's going to be doing tomorrow in Taipei. She will be meeting with the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen. That's going to happen in the first part of the day tomorrow, Wednesday, the 3rd of August. And after lunch, she will be flying out of the island nation in the afternoon local time. So it's a very short visit. It's less than 24 hours. But given the kind of hype that you're seeing around it, both from the U.S. side and more importantly in response from the Chinese side, you'd imagine that this is an absolutely groundbreaking visit. But it's, like I said, barely a few hours that she was going to be in Taipei. She will continue with the further leg of her Asia tour. But I want to go back to Amichai Stein. We've just had a war between Russia and Ukraine, and clearly both sides have made mistakes in that war. That war is still ongoing. It's into its 6th month now. Can the world afford another one? And this time, even if it's going to be between China and Taiwan, invariably the United States will have to get involved, either directly, if not indirectly. What lessons has the world drawn, if any, from the war between Russia and Ukraine in a way that we can prevent another one from erupting?
I think the question should be what China has learned from watching the war in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine, and how the West is responding to this war, and how the U.S. is responding. So I think this is also maybe the question. What we're seeing right now is that China is trying to be on the sidelines, not too much into Russia, not too much assisting Russia, not too much supporting Russia. Although Russia would like China to go into this conflict, we're seeing China staying on the sideline, watching and learning. Because, for example, that in China, they're learning what happened to the Soviet Union and why it collapsed. Meaning the Chinese are watching to see how this war is going on. And I think when they saw maybe the West response and the U.S. response, they took note of it. And I think China at this point doesn't really want an all-out war. Maybe in the future they would like to have a complete conquest of Taiwan. But at this point, I think the Chinese, and talking about war, is not a thing that is going together. The Chinese want to show they are the powerful force in the area, that they are the really, let's say, warlords in the sea. But I don't think at this point they are talking about war against Taiwan.
Okay.
And I think they want to show a lot of force, but not going over the threshold.
Ambassador Parthasarathy, one of the few, perhaps even the only country that has come out in support today, in support of China over Taiwan, is Russia. Do you believe that this is now just going to hasten the process of both of these countries firming up what would look likely an alliance, and an alliance against Western countries. And by virtue of being part of groupings like Quad, India gets lumped with the Western groupings as well.
No, I don't think India is going to get involved in military operations right across these areas. So what is really likely to happen is a bit of a show of tensions, a bit of sort of machoism on both sides, but they will have to cool off. That is the reality. No, you already have seen the price countries pay for in war, in what is happening in Ukraine. This will be much worse. So I don't think two superpowers are going to get involved in conflict over such an issue. But yes, I have no doubt in my mind that the Chinese will take some measures of military pressures without crossing a limit, because they have to save face.
What may it mean for countries like India? I mean, we have our own ongoing military standoff, if you will, with the Chinese over the last 2 years or so in eastern Ladakh. If there were to be an escalated situation across the Taiwan Straits, what may that mean for our own sort of ties with China?
No, well, I don't think the Chinese are going to link these two issues. One is on Taiwan, and ours is purely on a border. There are talks between senior generals on both sides. So right now the status quo is being maintained, though certainly India would like China to get back to where it was. So that is going to be negotiation. There, if any tensions are there, it could come separately, but it will have nothing to do with this. Okay. Here, I think there's going to be a lot of show-making on both sides, a lot of toing and froing and pretending to come to tensions. But both know what the costs are. I think both will find channels of communication to see neither loses face.
Okay, I want to go back to Andrew Liang. Xi Jinping a few months ago had publicly said that he intends to see the reunification of Taiwan with the mainland within the end of this decade. This year, he's up for what many are saying is a likely third term and chairman for life. I think in a couple of years from now, the PLA, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, celebrates its centennial year. How important is it for Xi Jinping, given this whole idea of no loss of face, having publicly said that he wants the reunification of Taiwan by all means possible, to be seen as not responding or not responding enough to Nancy Pelosi's visit, which the Chinese have already called an open provocation?
Well, aside from the Nancy Pelosi's visit and the United States chance to play the Taiwan card and trying to hollow out the so-called one China policy, the Taiwan unification has remained the core of Xi Jinping's China dream. In fact, Xi Jinping has reaffirmed many times that the latest time for the unification would be 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But on the other hand, it is only an aim. To realize that aim, there are many other channels, and an always preferred tactic is winning without war. In other words, the ideal solution is a peaceful unification. But on the other hand, the reality remains that most of the Taiwanese people do not want unification, but nor do they want independence, because independence would threaten their lifeblood. What they want is just maintain the status quo forever. But again, that is not an option for Xi Jinping. Now, I think the likely tactic is, with the lesson of the Nancy Pelosi visit, I think it is quite likely that Beijing would further strengthen its military capabilities of prevailing over Taiwan, quickening the process, perhaps building more vessels, more highly capable missiles, and also putting a lot of pressure to force Taiwan into negotiations for a peaceful solution.
Some kind of a
I
settlement.
think
All right.
that would be
Lisa
the aim.
Curtis,
Yeah.
on a day when the U.S. president addressed the nation and the world and announced the killing of one of the most dreaded terrorists in Ayman al-Zawahiri, can Joe Biden, especially as he's facing a very uncertain midterm election, can he afford to let things slip with China?
Well, first of all, you've addressed another extremely important issue to United States national security, which is the historic elimination of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, the successor to Osama bin Laden. One cannot understate how important this was. This shows that the U.S. can do over-the-horizon counterterrorism operations. This was a very precise operation, very successful. So that was a very good success in the counterterrorism fight. But your assertion that President Biden can't afford to be seen as letting up on China. Well, look, the American people don't want conflict between the U.S. and China. There's no appetite for that. The visit went forward. The House Speaker did not cow down to Chinese threats, but now it's time to, do whatever possible to cool down the tensions. And, as I stated before, I'm quite certain that, there are lines of communication, being probed and efforts to try to tamp down the tensions. There is certainly, Republican support for being tough on China. We've seen that bipartisan support. Really, there is both Democrat and Republican support for competing effectively with China. And staying in that competition. But at the same time, nobody wants to see that competition devolve into conflict. So I think the job for President Biden now is to find a way to walk back from this very high level of tensions that we find ourselves in. So it's a very sensitive period. And, we're in uncharted territory in many ways. But I don't think that there is this clamoring among the American public to, allow this to develop into any kind of conflict. I think.
All right, I'm just getting in another piece of breaking news. I'm sorry to interrupt, Lisa Curtis, but this is Nancy Pelosi tweeting right after landing in Taipei. She has put out a series of tweets, and I'm going to read from them. Our visit reiterates that America stands with Taiwan, a robust, vibrant democracy, and our important partner in the Indo-Pacific. Now, I think one distinction U.S. authorities, including, of course, from the Speaker's office, one distinction that they're trying to draw is that this is a visit by the Speaker. The Speaker, of course, represents democracy, the House of Representatives, which is the House which elects direct representatives who represent the American people, and the Speaker, of course, is the leader of that House. So Amichai Stein, will that distinction that this is a visit by the Speaker who represents democracy and this is in solidarity with another robust and vibrant democracy, and that is in contrast to the closed and autocratic system in China, would that try and further exacerbate tensions between Beijing and Washington, or would that actually, calm things down? Because after all, it's not like the Defense Secretary has gone there or the Secretary of State has gone there.
So the U.S. administration tried to ease the tension before the visit, telling the Chinese, listen, she's not from the government, she's from another branch, from the Congress. But the Chinese aren't really convinced because, A, let's remember, she's third in line to be the president of the U.S. The second thing, she's a Democrat, and Biden is a Democrat, meaning the same person, the same senior official from the president's party is going to Taiwan. And this is something you cannot really explain the Chinese, that there's difference between the presidential branch and the Congress branch. So I think all these attempts by U.S. officials to try and explain to the Chinese that, listen, these are different things, we're not the same stuff, aren't really working. And by the way, I think even the U.S. officials didn't believe themselves that it will work on the Chinese, because we saw in the last few weeks Biden and other officials trying to convince Pelosi not to go, meaning they understood that no answer and no response to the Chinese will ever convince them that these are two different things, meaning the Chinese are seeing Pelosi visit as a U.S. official visit in Taiwan. And you just read what the White House is issuing. They're saying that this visit doesn't have any change or implication over the one China stance back then from the 70s. And even, Pelosi issued in one of the tweets saying that there's no change in the U.S. administration official policy towards China and Taiwan. So, yeah, the U.S. is doing everything to convince the Chinese that this visit isn't changing anything, but it isn't really convincing the Chinese government.
Okay, G. Parthasarathy, I'll give you the final word. The big concern world over, including here in India, is about semiconductors. Just one Taiwanese company, TSMC, manufactures more than 80% of the world's semiconductors. Do you see a negative fallout as a result of this visit and any possible Chinese action in response to that having on the semiconductor supply chain around the world?
The Chinese are very practical people when it comes to money. When it comes to semiconductors, Beijing needs it as much as anyone else, including India. And Taiwan is the epicenter of that. Yes, the United States does, to a certain extent, fabricate semiconductors and work on them in their companies. But Taiwan is the powerhouse of the world for semiconductors. So that is yet another reason why people should just cool it, because the Chinese need what Taiwan produces as much as the Americans and as much as the Indians. So as I see it, there are a number of reasons where people will be looking for a face-saving way out for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing still remains. I think China remains an expansionist policy in its region, hence the Quad and various other organizations. And there are reasons where the U.S. should focus on that rather than getting into disagreements on
all right.
tensions on such points.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to Ambassador Parthasarathy, Lisa Curtis, Amit Stein, and, of course, Andrew K.P. Leung for joining us. We'll be live, of course, with the very latest coming in from Taipei. Like I said, Nancy Pelosi has touched down in that city. There's been an uproar, an absolute uproar in terms of both rhetoric and warnings coming in from Beijing. There's also going to be 4 days of live military drills all around the Taiwan Straits, including maritime drills, air drills, and, of course, conventional missile tests as well. And we'll be right on top of that story. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, one of the most wanted terrorists in the world is dead in a drone strike right in the heart of Kabul, raising many questions, many uncomfortable questions for the ruling Taliban dispensation there, as indeed for Pakistan.